to enable Christina to keep us all to time, the crucial issue for the day. Welcome to the third plenary session today. My name is Rob Downs. I work at the Policy Institute at King's College London, if you don't know me. I'll be chairing today's panel, which is on the topic of UK nuclear decision-making. So extremely topical, I think, given we're overcome by Brexit. Almost all of the time, it seems. It's sucking up all of the oxygen that remains in this country in terms of policy making and general discussion. We also have had a range of pivotal decisions relating to the UK's civil and defence nuclear infrastructure in recent years, so this is a topical panel indeed. Consequently, I am pleased to welcome our three speakers today. We have Dr. Suzanne Doyle, who's a lecturer in international relations at the University of East Anglia. She's going to be talking about the United States sale of Trident to the UK, something we should all be reflecting on at the moment. We have Patrick Ferns, who's a mechanical engineer at the Atomic Weapons Establishment. He'll be talking about an issue that's extremely close to my heart, the implications for nuclear safeguarding in the UK arising from the UK's departure from the EURATOM, the European Atomic Energy Community. And we also have James Bauld, who's a fluid systems engineer at Rolls-Royce, who'll be talking about the future of the UK fast attack submarine. So, reminding all of our speakers to stick to their 10-minute limit to make sure that Christina doesn't get annoyed with me. Suzanne, why don't you take us away?
That's not my slides. I don't know where they are. We'll just go on. Okay, so click through. Okay. So this is a just preview of what's going to happen. Yeah, this is bad. Sorry. Okay. No, that's not mine either. Okay, so
perhaps the order that they're listed in the programme is not the order that we're expected to give them today.
I'm now stuck and I can't get it to move. Someone's doing it for me. It's not even that great a presentation. I mean, there's not that much on the slides. Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to provide a bit of history today to our discussions. So in July 2016, British MPs voted to improve the manufacture of 4 replacement submarines for the current Trident nuclear system, as we heard this morning. And we can roughly expect, based on current estimates, that around the early 2020s, the British government will need to take a decision on the replacement of the Trident warhead. And then in the following decade, a decision on the procurement of new missiles to replace the current Trident D5s leased from the United States. My current research and the focus of today's talk is the UK's original purchase of the Trident missile system from the United States. Specifically, I'm interested in the US-UK relationship that lies at the heart of Britain's nuclear programme and how this impacts UK decision-making. Why am I interested in this? Well, the United Kingdom is technically dependent on the United States for the Trident nuclear system. As such, to understand British decision-making on its nuclear programme, it is necessary to understand and analyse the role of the United States and how that interacts with British decision-making. However, discussion on the replacement of Trident often overlooks or obscures the role of the United States. There are many reasons for this, including that it is difficult for politicians to discuss the technical dependency of, to use commonplace discourse, the independent nuclear deterrent. Secondly, within public discussion, whilst the current discussion on Trident replacement is much more open than British nuclear policy of the past, analysts and the interesting public are not privy to the UK government's conversations with Washington. However, it is now possible to analyse the role of the United States in the sale of Trident in the early 1980s and the impact this had on British decision-making. due to the declassification of government documents at the time. And today's brief overview of the Trident negotiations is based on archival research they have conducted in the British National Archives, the Ronald Reagan Library, and the Carter Library. And given the secrecy of US-UK negotiations and the supply of US delivery systems, I think such analysis is of historical and contemporary importance. So I have a handy timeline. So there are two agreements of note. The Trident C4 agreement with the Carter White House in June 1980, and the Trident D5 agreement with the Reagan administration in March 1982. I'm going to spend a few minutes briefly outlining and comparing both administrations' approach to the sale and the impact this had on UK decision making. So in February 1978, the Labour Jim Callaghan government commissioned a study commonly referred to as the Duff-Mason report that would consider the principal options for the replacement of Polaris. What we see in the cabinet committees of this time and subsequent government discussions is that there was never really any debate on whether the Polaris system should be replaced. However, we also see assessments that a truly independent system was not an option. And here the lessons of Cheveline, the costs of Cheveline, were really key. As such, Callaghan commissioned the Duff-Mason report so the British government could figure out what they wanted and have a better idea of what system should replace Polaris so that it could ensure that its preferred option wasn't closed off by the US in the ongoing strategic arms limitation talks between the US and Soviet Union. So you see a lot of interaction, which I don't have time to talk about today, between the ongoing arms control agreements of that time and the Trident purchase. So the Duff-Mason report recommends rather conclusively that the replacement should be the US Trident C4 system with MERV. Over the next months, Callaghan and then Thatcher approached the Carter White House to inquire about the possible supply of the system. Now here the British find a White House that is broadly very supportive as assisting the British with the replacement of Polaris. However, the Carter White House was concerned about the possible political impact of the supply on other elements of US foreign policy, namely the impact on the strategic arms limitation talks with the US and the dual-track decision in NATO. As such, the Carter White House delayed formal negotiations on the supply of Trident C4 from roughly October 1979 to March 1980. Now, this delay creates great angst in Downing Street due to the political problems that Carter has at this point and fears over whether Thatcher would secure the agreement before the end of his term, and then the political problems this creates for Thatcher due to speculation in the press. In the end, afraid of a damaging leak from the British about the delay, the US decided to proceed with formal negotiations on the supply of Trident. Now, at this point, the British government were rather surprised by the hard-nosed approach of the United States. At the beginning of the negotiations, the Carter White House demanded a British commitment to use the savings from the US-UK nuclear cooperation on conventional forces. So they asked for a payment of the full pro rata research and development levy, or for the British to provide offsets. And they wanted these offsets in various forms, and they also wanted agreements to their plans to extend the US facilities on Diego Garcia. Now, Thatcher wasn't happy with this. And you can see here a scribble from Thatcher. It's the blue type text there. And she writes, "I have read these papers with dismay. We should never have trusted the assurance we were given. I am not prepared to negotiate on this basis." And you can imagine Margaret Thatcher kind of scribbling this down in frustration. So after protracted negotiations, the British agreed to a watered-down commitment on conventional force spending, to pay a 5% R&D levy in addition to operating US Rapier systems in Britain, and US plans for Diego Garcia. Now, in real terms, these demands are not onerous for the British. It feeds into the wider Cold War policy where US and Britain are aligned. And these demands are not onerous, particularly in light of the savings that the purchase of Trident affords compared to other options for the replacement of Polaris. But what we do see here is that the United States expected certain returns, certain commitments to conventional deployment, and were prepared to use the supply of Trident to influence British defence and US foreign policy within certain remits. So the US officials openly discuss using Trident as leverage in order to secure British agreements to their plans on Diego Garcia. And in this way, the Carter White House treat the US-UK nuclear relationship as transactional in nature, as demonstrated by this document from the Carter Library. So it says, Jim, we need a book with all the draft letters, commitments, etc. on Diego and everything. In other words, a Bible. So it kind of demonstrates everything else that goes on alongside the Trident negotiations. I have another great archival document, which I don't have a photo of today, which basically says the Diego Trident package is in place. And it really shows this link that goes on between in the relationship. Okay. So the election of Ronald Reagan reopened the replacement of Polaris due to the new president's election pledges of strategic modernization. The British, again, due to the lessons and expense of Cheveline, wished to maintain commonality with the United States. So again, there's this period of great uncertainty and concerns about wasted money on Trident C4 as they wait for Reagan to make a decision about when the US would replace Trident C4 with Trident D5. And once Reagan makes this decision, he does promise that the D5 would be available to the UK, and he's pretty instantaneous in this promise. However, the US do not provide assurances over whether the system would be given on similar terms to the C4. And this creates huge concern in the British Cabinet Committee over whether the UK could continue to afford a nuclear weapons system. After hesitation and discussion within the Cabinet Committee over 2 meetings, so they have a first one, they can't reach a decision, they have to reschedule and have a whole day of discussing this, they do decide to go ahead with discussions on the sale of Trident D5. And we see here the absolute belief in the need for a UK deterrent, this kind of strategic culture and belief play an underpinning decision-making here. So there's a common portrayal of Reagan and Thatcher as very friendly. But this didn't change the US approach on the D5 negotiations. Again, we see that the US took a hard-nosed approach in negotiations. They sought various quid pro quos in return for the supply of Trident D5, despite their broad support for the supply of the system and Britain's nuclear program. Namely, again, they wanted certain adjustments on British defence spending. They sought the retention of HMS Invincible, and they sought for the British to delay their withdrawal from Belize. So again, it's feeding into this wider defence relationship, the things they asked for. After protracted negotiations, the US again received certain things in return, such as the retention of HMS Fearless and Intrepid. Okay, so why does this analysis matter? We can see that British dependency on the United States in the original Trident sale led to far greater US influence over British decision-making than is often acknowledged in contemporary debates. It created both angst over whether a deal would be completed in a timely fashion due to the influence of various political events, as well as angst over whether the system would be provided at a price the British could afford. We also see the ways the US utilised British technical dependence to influence and shape wider British defence policy, despite their broad support for the UK's nuclear programme. So despite this, both administrations sought commitments that would benefit US wider foreign policy and domestic policy aims, but not financially harm the British. So I argue that there is this transactionality to the US-UK defence relationship going on here. As such, the original sale of Trident highlights that in contemporary Trident replacement, the UK's nuclear programme is, at least in part, contingent on the dynamics of US politics and deal-making, particularly, perhaps important to highlight in the Trump era. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne. That was great. Patrick.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Ferns, and this afternoon I'll be talking about how leaving the European Union may affect safeguards in the UK. So, first of all, like many others, just a quick disclaimer. The content and opinions in this presentation are those of mine alone, and are not the views of AWE, its partners, or the UK government. So, first of all, a quick look at safeguards. What are they? So they are an assurance by a nation that they will not divert nuclear material for nuclear weapons purposes. And these are done through materials accountancy and inspections. And a fundamental principle of these is that they are independent of the country providing that assurance. So at present, the UK is a member of the European Atomic Energy Community, which was established under the EURATOM Treaty, and from this point forward I will refer to it as EURATOM for ease. So EURATOM's aim is to ensure regular and equitable supply of nuclear fuels to EU users. And one of the ways it does this is by monitoring transactions involved in the nuclear fuel cycle. So initially, the EURATOM could be viewed as a trading bloc, but it is far more than that due to the research and training activities that it performs. So, as you are all probably well aware at this point, the UK voted to leave the EU. And it later announced that this would include EURATOM, which was a surprise to some people at the time, as there were very few complaints about the EURATOM programmes. But the UK and the European Parliament both agreed that membership of EURATOM cannot occur without membership of the EU. So the UK has a number of current obligations as a signatory to the NPT. And EURATOM is involved in many of the treaties that the UK has signed due to its long standing. So the current obligations that would need to be fulfilled in the future, post leaving EURATOM, are a voluntary offer agreement with the IAEA and an additional protocol in the same way that we have now, which is currently being negotiated, a number of nuclear cooperation agreements for which the UK is focusing on 4 to begin with: the US, Canada, Australia and Japan, and then subsequent ratification of those agreements in those countries, and its own state system of accountancy for the control of nuclear material. And it intends to do this by passing into law the Nuclear Safeguards Bill and some resultant regulation. So what is the Nuclear Safeguards Bill? It aims to do 4 things principally. First, it's create a legal framework for nuclear safeguards to be put in place. The next is to place the ONR in charge of providing that safeguards regime. And then it allows the Secretary of State powers to create and amend nuclear safeguards legislation for a period of time after leaving EURATOM. So, what challenges are there to be faced? The answer is many. The first of which is staff and time commitment. So EURATOM provided staff for 1,000 person days of inspections of UK facilities in 2014. That takes a large number of people and a large commitment of time. It's been estimated that approximately 25 staff would need to be hired by the ONR with very specific skills in order to fulfill these roles. Currently, they are struggling to do this. They also require a large amount of equipment. The estimate at one point was £150 million worth of equipment. In addition to this, they need to introduce a new IT system. These three things have all recently been announced by a leaked report from the ONR that they are red on their risk register, as unlikely to be in place by the time the UK leaves, or by exit day. An additional point is the lack of additional inspection. This won't be a problem with the nuclear safeguards in place. However, nuclear safeguards are somewhat based on international perception, and the removal of an independent body providing safeguards rather than the UK body, which it would be, could be seen as a degradation of the UK's safeguards. So at the beginning of this whole process, the UK had a few options. The first was no safeguards regime, which, as a nuclear state, is pretty inviable. So I think we can count that out. The next is domestic safeguards regime, and there are three subcategories to this. So there's no association with EURATOM. However, they are the closest geographical neighbour, and EDF, which is French government own 8 of the UK's nuclear power stations. In addition to this, on a non-safeguards related topic, there's also trade of radioisotopes from the European Union. Well, you can obviously see the next one's also ruled out. And the reason for that is that the UK does a large amount of research with the European Union, and the government have stated that they wish to continue partaking in this research in the future. The next is a close association with EURATOM. This is an option that has been the UK government's preferred option from, I won't say day one, but pretty much. Which I'll examine slightly more in a second. Associate membership of EURATOM, which by some has been ruled out, including some members of the European Union's negotiating team. However, we have been told repeatedly in the UK that we are going for a bespoke Brexit. So couldn't a bespoke Brexit include an associate membership of EURATOM? So again, I'll examine this more in a second. And finally, full membership of EURATOM. This is enshrined in EU law that this cannot be the case, so therefore we'll rule that out. So if we look at associated membership and close association, these are just a few of the factors that I've come up with. So day one safeguards. With a close association, the ONR have stated that they are unlikely to be able to meet the high standards that EURATOM currently provides, whereas an associate membership would allow for those EURATOM standards to be maintained. In relation to that, the burden on the ONR, which with a close association would be high, and they have stated informally with that leaked report that they may not be able to perform some of these functions in the short term. Whereas associated membership, it could carry on as it is now, and I've yet to hear anybody state that the EURATOM principles don't work. Another of these factors is the European Court of Justice jurisdiction. So with a close association, it would be financial, where the UK would contribute to various programmes that they wish to be involved with in the future. Whereas an associated membership, the UK would have to respect the rule of the European Court of Justice. And a final point, so access to programmes. With an associated membership, we would have full access in the future, as we do now, whereas with close association, it may be potentially limited in the way that members of programmes that associations of programmes at the moment may be limited due to things like freedom of movement. So now I'm going to get all of you involved and ask you to vote. So, could you please raise your hands if you would prefer an associated membership based on those factors? And those who would prefer a close association, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you very much, and look forward to your questions.
Okay, Patrick, thank you. Much food for thought there. The reason I voted this way is because I think that's what's going to happen. So whether I want it or not, I think that seems quite likely at this stage. No, it's much to talk about in the questions afterwards. Okay, thank you very much. Now I'm going to invite James to tell us a little bit about the UK fast attack submarine.
Good afternoon. I haven't prepared a disclaimer myself, so I'll just take this opportunity to say that everything presented is my own opinion. I'll also take the opportunity to apologise for the colour scheme, but I'll make no apologies for my illustrations that I've created myself, as you'll soon see. So today I'm going to be talking on the topic of nuclear propulsion, but not in the context of the continuous at sea deterrent, which I think Pony is most familiar with.